Good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board. It's Thursday, February 11th, and I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. We have a quorum of members tonight, and so we will get started. I'd like to just remind you that in response to the governor's declaration of a public health emergency, the board will be meeting by Zoom, and this is also available to be viewed on GovTV or on YouTube. And as well, the video recordings of this and all past meetings will be available for viewing on the CPOA website. I believe I believe that's all the announcement I have. So item 2, the mission statement is
Excuse me,
advancing
Dr. Tuck.
Yes.
Can you announce the members present and others present for the record?
All right. Sorry. So members present are member Amir Pruitt, member Chantel Galloway, member Doug Mitchell, member Eric Nixon, and member Eric Olivas, and myself, the chair, Bill Cass. So as we have from the CPOA, Director Ed Harness, Valerie Barala, Katrina Segala, and our counsel, Tina Gooch. We also have from the CPC liaison, I think that's your title, Kelly Mensah. And we have several members of APD present, Zach Cottrell, and Acting Commander Chris Patterson, Lieutenant Mike Meisinger. From the City Attorney's Office, I see Lindsay Van Meter. From the DOJ, I see Elizabeth Martinez, and we also have Human Resource Attorney Melissa Kuntz, and from the city, Chris Sylvan. Anybody I miss? If we missed you and you have a role, let's see, is Pastor David Walker here yet? Did he get in?
Hi, Dr. Cass. It's Commander Corey Lowe from APD as well.
Oh, thank you. Now I see you. Thank you. So, the mission statement is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD in the Albuquerque community. So, item 3, approval of the agenda. All have had a chance to look at the agenda, and I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda. And I think because we're in Zoom era, we have to have a roll call vote for this. So,
motion to agenda.
And I'll second that. And all right, roll call to approve the agenda. Member Amir Pruitt?
Yes.
Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Nixon?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So the agenda is approved 6 unanimously. We're now at item 4, public comment. We received 2 public comments from Geraldine Amato, and those have been posted so that all members will be able to read those offline. All right, item 5, review and approval of the minutes from, we have 2 meetings that we need approval for the minutes. The January 14th, 2021 CPOA board minutes. I would like a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, member Amir Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So the minutes from January 14th are approved. There's an ad hoc committee minutes from October 30th, since the committee, I believe, only met that one time and has not had and has since been disbanded. There's been no chance to approve these minutes, so we're in the process of approving the minutes from that October 30th meeting of the ad hoc committee. So we have a motion to do that.
So moved.
Second? I'll second it. So All in favor of approving the ad hoc committee meetings from October 30th, 2020? Member Armia Pruitt.
Point of order, Dr. Cass. I think that the
Yes.
only two people who can approve these minutes are Member Olivas and myself.
All right, so I would poll Member Olivas and Member Galloway to Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the minutes for the October 30th ad hoc committee meeting have been approved by the members of the committee that were present at the meeting. All right, we're at item 6, reports from city departments. APD, we have recognized that the professional standards and division statistical data report for January 2021 has been submitted and attached to the agenda. And if we have, who's doing that? Commander Cottrell?
Yes, sir. Good evening, Dr. Cass, members of the board. You guys all have a copy of my report for the month of January. We did close out 7 investigations and interns that are out for chain of command review currently. We did close out an additional 11 that went through and discipline was imposed. And those 11 cases are listed below with the finding for each SOP violation attached to that case. For the month of January, we did open up 19 cases for investigation in internal affairs. That number has actually stayed very consistent in the last 3 months. In December, we opened 20. In November, we opened 20. So that kind of seems to be our number lately on monthly openings. Area command cases, and once again, those are the lower level cases, the minor policy violations, such as showing up to work late, not turning in reports on time, minor violations like that. We opened up 40 cases of those and sent out to the division heads for investigation. That number has actually been dropping lately. In December, it was 54, and in November, it was 60. So trend, it looks like, hopefully, a lot of these minor violations are starting to clean themselves up once word gets out that we are investigating and taking them seriously. So I hope to see that trend keep going. We did carry over 16 cases in the month of January. They're still closing out. I can tell you I've closed out about 5 this week, it feels like, that I've read and sent out. So we're still busy. Any questions on the report this month? Last month, there was a request for us to look at another agency and compare maybe some IA numbers. So I did look at Baltimore, who's also under consent decree. Their numbers for fourth quarter were 365 total internal investigations. That does not include external complaints such as ours that go to the CPOA for investigation. So they had 365 internal in fourth quarter. Compared to us, APD had 228. So we are below them, but do keep in mind they are a much larger agency than us, probably about twice the size. So their numbers compared to ours are going to be a little bit skewed.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Commander Cottrell? All right.
Thank you, Dr. Cass.
Thank you again, and of course you're free to go or stay as you please. So the report from the IA Force Division. So we are now at item 6A2. IA Force.
Good evening, Dr. Cass, members of the board. First, I want to introduce myself. Most of you know I'm Commander Corey Lowe. I'm with APD. Starting February 1st, I actually moved from the Compliance and Oversight Division to temporary duty over the Internal Affairs Force Division. So I've been there a little over a week. But to give you some basic statistical information for use of force for the month of January, there was a total of 56. There's 14 level 1s, 37 level 2s, And that includes one that's happening at the Prisoner Transport Center, which is located in the Valley Area Command. There was 3 level 3s and another level 3 that occurred at the PTC downtown.
We're keeping stable
With our force per 1,000 calls, the 2 higher ones is Southeast with 2.1 uses of force per 1,000 calls and 1.8 in the Valley. The rest of them are under 1.0. We're ranging from 0.7 to 0.9. Throughout the area commands, the foothills had 6, and all of those were level 2s. The Northeast had 8. They had 1 level 3, 5 level 2s, and 2 level 1s. Northwest had a total of 4, and they had 3 level 2s and 1 level 1. Our Southeast Area Command, which is the one we have the most uses of force, had 16 level 2s and 5 level 1s. Southwest with 2 level 2s and 1 level 1. And then Valley, we broke up between the Prisoner Transport Center. And the reason for doing so is to not skew the numbers that happen in the Valley Area Command and taking out that Prisoner Transport Center, which if everyone knows, all of our prisoners go to there before they go on to MDC if the PTC is open. So the Valley had 2 that happened at the PTC, level 3 and a level 2. And then they had 2 level 3s, 5 level 2s, and 4 level 1s. Continuing with our normal statistics that we've seen in the last year, family disputes and disturbances are the top 2 types of calls for service that could result in a use of force. That's what I have for this month. I don't know if there's any questions for me at this time, sir.
Any questions from the board? Yes, Member Olivas.
Yeah, so I really like this per 1,000 metric. I think this is a nice way to look at it rather than just reporting the raw numbers. It's much more meaningful. And in the past, that's often been the refrain with Southeast Area Command and Valley to some extent, is that you know, they're just getting more calls for service in those areas, so they're having more raw numbers of these force incidents. But it looks like with this new metric, it's showing that there's actually a pretty clear and consistent difference between those 2 area commands and the other 4. So, you know, the other 4 ranging right around 1, with these ranging right around 2 per 1,000. Do you have any comment on why that might be? I'm just curious, now that we can rule out the number of calls.
Of course. No, that's a good question.
I wish I had a much better answer being a week and a half into this, but that is what we're working with Kate Jacobs, our data analyst, to kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of these area commands with higher rates. Even though they're consistently higher, it would be nice to know if we just have simply more domestic violence calls, disturbance calls, or if there's other factors that we need to take into consideration when looking into the uses of force.
Great. I'll try to remember to follow up with you next month or in a couple months when you've had a little more time to look at that and see if you have any further thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I will
follow up next month as well.
Any other questions for Commander Lowell? Thank you. I appreciate your coming down and talking to us, and you can stay or leave, whatever you choose. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening.
Yeah, same to you. All right, so we are to the APD Crash Review Board update, and was informed that the officer who is going to present this is attending the services for the state police officer who was killed in the line of duty earlier this week. And so I can present the material that was given to us so that you have a chance to at least hear what was submitted. So the results of the APD involved crashes from October 1st through 2020 through December 31st, which is what they call quarter 2. There were 34 non-preventable crashes, 22 preventable crashes, 1 non-crash. 5 officers had 2 or more preventable crashes within a 12-month period. And oh, by the way, there's a note here that says that officers' chain of command imposes discipline, not the crash review board. The APD crashes and claims paid out from October 1st through December 31st were approximately $74,000 third-party payouts, which were bodily injury or property damage, and there were 21 claims. And another $258,000 in first-party damage to city property involved in APD crashes. First party refers to single vehicle crashes or city vehicle or city versus city vehicle, and there were 51 claims. And so that's the substance of the report. And I appreciate submitting it. And so if there's any questions, I think you can all, there may be somebody from APD who can answer these better than I can. So you have the information. If there's any questions and somebody from APD volunteers to answer them, then we can handle it that way. Or if there's no questions, we'll move on to the next item. So, all right. So I seeing no questions. We are at item 4, which is the use of force training report from the APD Academy, and I believe it's Acting Commander Patterson and Lieutenant Mike Meisinger who are here to present that. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Cass, and members of the board. I'll introduce myself real quick. My name is Chris Patterson. I'm the acting commander at the Academy. I've been in this role since really November 1st of last year. Before that, I was actually at the Academy assigned to the field training program, and I've been working with the other lieutenants there instead while we're waiting to get a permanent commander placed in there. I'm going to go ahead and try and share a presentation, or if I can get permission to share a presentation that we created to show this. Thank you. So this is kind of our layout. I know in the last IMR, the Academy took a big hit on not being able to deliver any of the use of force training, specifically the Tier 4 training that came out, that was supposed to come out last year. With the COVID pandemic and some other issues, we weren't able to do that. However, we're taking that feedback to heart, and we're really driving forward, trying to not only get the 24 hours of required use of force training that we need to actually go above and beyond that, and to be able to deliver Tier 4. Kind of some online training to kind of preload some of the topics for Tier 4, because it's been over a year to about a year and a half since the original first 3 tiers were delivered to the officers. We've got some training courses. These comprise of a video and then a testing portion at the end of the material. There's a 30-minute video on practical application and force classifications for defensive tactics. Those are the actual hands-on techniques that the officers use, such as armbar takedowns and things of that nature. There's a use of force lecture that's another 30 minutes, and that was actually pulled from some of the Tier 4 material. Just again, trying to help remind some of these officers of these principles and concepts that we're going to be talking about, because it's been such a long period of time. There's a shooting on the move video, which is about 10 minutes in length with the test after, and a foot pursuit video, which talks about the dangers and the considerations when officers engage themselves in a foot pursuit. And that's about a 45-minute video from previously approved material that we've kind of relaunched out to the officers. And then one of the new things that we're really excited about is the city has acquired a simulator trainer, and we've got one course approved right now. It's about a 15-minute simulation, and then a 45-minute one-on-one training and evaluation process that happens. And this is, it's kind of like a 360-degree video game, if you will. The officers are able to step in there, and it has a wide variety of already pre-programmed or designable scenarios that we can have the officers run through in order to meet desired objectives that we're trying to get them to do. After that, what everybody's been waiting for and what we're very excited to get out is going to be the actual delivery of the Tier 4 defensive tactics portion. That is 2 days of training. The first part is a defensive tactics, where it's those, again, like I had mentioned before, those kind of hands-on techniques that the officers may have to use That's a 10-hour day, and the students receive a lecture, and there's demonstration of practical skills. And then there's 2 training scenarios with the use of force interview with the IAFD investigators at the end of those scenarios. In addition to that, there's multiple drill stations that the officers will have to do to demonstrate proficiency in those skill sets, with a instructor there to review, grade, and critique to make sure that they're doing it the right way. Then we move on to the second day of Tier 4, the RBT, or reality-based training scenarios. Again, there's going to be some lecture on concepts. These are dealing more with the tools that the officers use, the 40 millimeter, the taser, OC spray, the other tools that were not covered in that first day, which is all the hands-on techniques. So after they get the lectures, there's an additional 2 training scenarios to test and evaluate the comprehension of the instructed principles. And there is going to be remedial training that's going to be provided to officers if we need to correct any unsatisfactory performance. In addition to that, so that puts us, that gets the Tier 4 that we didn't get done last year, but we're getting done this year. In addition to that, the officers will also be getting 2 additional hours of de-escalation training in the 2021 MOU, which is the maintenance of effort training. That's in accordance with House Bill 93. There'll be 3 hours of training for taser recertification. And this year, the officers will get 10 hours of firearms manipulation and qualifications during their call this year, which, as you can see in there, it puts us about 36 hours of use of force training, which again, we're required for the COSTA to get 24 with what happened last year. We wanted to make sure not only did we meet that goal, but we exceeded it going forward. Here's some delivery dates on when we're planning to have this training out there to the officers. The videos and simulator training, we're hopeful that has been approved by the DOJ and the IMT. We just need to get them scheduled out and launched, but those are approved and ready to go. I'm hoping to have the simulator training running here by the end of the month, and we figure it'll take us about a month or so to run everybody through that simulator. We have the Tier 4 defensive tactics, which will actually be starting at the end of this month on February 25th. And then we'll start delivering that to the remainder of the department. And then the RBT scenarios will be starting in June, going till November 24th. We're going to focus and do all of the first day all at once, get everybody through that first portion, and then start the reality-based training portion later in the year. The reason behind that is there's a lot of setup and moving things around, and it just seems more beneficial to get everybody through that first day, and then we can transition the staff and the facilities over completely to run that second day. The Phase 1 MOE, which will be starting here on March 15th and going till April. The taser recertification start on May 3rd and go through July 23rd. And we have our firearms qualification starting in March on the 15th and going to May 7th. Realizing some of the issues that happened with COVID-19 and how that drastically changed the world in general, but the ability for us to conduct training at the academy, we've made several changes. Right now, all the training that we're going to develop that's coming out of the academy, we're building in multiple provisions for alternate testing and delivery methods. If we can do in-person training with small groups, that's the goal. That kind of gives us the best method of delivery, but it's not always practical. So we're also building in the ability to do these classes on Zoom. That's kind of the way the world's moved to at this point. In addition to the video and Power DMS presentations that you've seen, we've already been able to incorporate some of those. So all our lesson plans will have stuff built in where we can easily transition from one delivery method to another, depending on what the current situation is with the public health order and if there's any surges in virus transmission. We're also looking at doing some roll call training and video newsletters. This is very similar to what IA Professional Standards does and IA Force with some of the trends and issues that they've seen and been able to identify. These are short, about 5-minute length videos that we'll be launching on Power DMS to refresh on different topics that may be addressed, and kind of it's a way to quickly address something that we've been able to identify either through the academy or some of the other parts in the department. Some of the areas that we may discuss in our initial videos, the necessary use of force, the difference between immediate and imminent, and the difference between de-escalation and giving commands, and trying to explain and remind officers that there's a difference between the two. It's important to note, however, that these 5-minute videos, they will not count towards any of our use of force hours. However, at the academy, we feel that it's going to be better served to help keep the officers and everybody kind of moving in that right direction and to address critical areas that we've identified or that have been identified quickly in a kind of a rapid fire way, instead of having it prolonged and dealt with in a training session much further down the road, in which case there's going to be more opportunity for things to happen. So those are some of the items that we've put into place for this next year going forward, and we feel that they're going to be not only obtainable, but successful. I'll open it up for if anyone has any questions from the board or the audience.
Questions? Just as a reminder, how many officers go through this process, and how often is it required? Is this a one-time or is this annual training?
For the Tier 4, sir?
Yes.
So the Tier 4 will be a one-time delivery, and every officer on the department will go through that. However, the following year, there will always be the requirement of having the 24 hours of there will always be the 24 hours of use of force training that will happen. It will just be in covering other topics. It will not be Tier 4.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Lieutenant Meisinger, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, sir. I think Acting Commander Patterson covered it quite well.
Right, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I appreciate your coming down, and as I mentioned in the email that I sent you, one of the things that the board voted on a while back was to have a periodic presentation of current issues at training, and this was what I ended up choosing from the list that you provided me, and we'll be back in touch. And I know that we have on the agenda later a motion by Member Galloway to get some update on training for domestic violence and child abuse interviews, I believe. So if it's kind of a heads up, but we appreciate your cooperation, and thank you again for coming down and making this presentation. So
yes.
And of course, you're free to go or stay as you choose. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
All right, so moving on to item, we are now at the City Council presentation. Is this Mr. Sylvan? Is that?
Yep.
All
Good
right.
evening, Chair Dr. Cass, Honorable Board. Chris Sylvan with the City Council. I have two items to report. OC 21-26 and OC 21-27 will be heard at the February 17th council meeting. And those OCs deal with Board Member Nixon and Board Member Olivas's reappointment to the CPOA board. And that's all I have from City Council. Do you want me to do public safety now, or?
Yes, please.
So the Public Safety Committee met on February 9th, and there was just one item on there, R-21-133, and that's commissioning an update to the 2014 Social Services Gap Analysis Study and adjusting fiscal year 2021 general fund appropriations to provide funding for that purpose. That item was sent to council with a motion of no recommendation. Also at that meeting, Tanya Covington from the Rapid Accountability Diversion Program gave a presentation, which was very good. So I don't know if the board got to see that, but gave in detail about what that division does. So that's the public safety. And for questions.
Sorry. So are there any questions from the board? Yes, Member Amia Pruitt.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Sullivan. Thanks for joining us. I have a quick question about the state of the process for new board members, where we are in that.
Chair Cass, Board Member Armijo Pruitt, we're still working on getting those board members appointed. If I'm not correct, I think the city attorney and the Department of Justice met this afternoon to discuss what they're going to discuss with the city council. Council was not able to attend that meeting, nor I, because council is right now having a committee of the whole doing the CIP bonding cycle. So that meeting happened at 3 and it just ended.
Any other questions from the board? Member Galloway.
Hey, Chris. So the DOJ and who met with council today?
Chair Cass, Member Galloway, it was city legal in the DOJ.
And they were meeting about this particular issue?
Yes, they were meeting about that particular issue. I'm sure city legal can fill you in on that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Sylvan, and you're free to go or free to stay. Thank you. All right, we are at the mayor's office, report from the mayor's office, and I believe that was Pastor David Walker whose slot this is. Is that correct? Is he present? Was he able to get into the meeting?
Chair Dr. Cass, he was in the meeting, and then I don't see him now. I don't know if he got bumped out or what happened.
All right, so let's move on, and then if he can, if he gets in later, we will come back and have his presentation. So, City Attorney, item D.
Good afternoon, Chair Dr. Cass, members of the board. I'm going to go out of order. I wasn't planning on talking first about the meeting that we had today with the Department of Justice, but we met today with the Department of Justice, Ms. Gooch and Director Harness, and you, Chair Dr. Cass. I think I'm covering everyone. Ms. Martinez, several other members of the DOJ, to discuss the concerns that the community, the board, and the DOJ have with regard to the status of appointing new members to the board. So we hear the concerns, we understand the concerns. We're working on setting up a meeting with council next week, or at least the council president next week, to discuss these issues further and to ensure that there's going to be some quick movement with regard to the appointment of current members, and to work on some of these process issues that that have been brought to our attention. So we'll work on that. I'm sure Director Harness and Dr. Cass will be able to report more to you all about that. I also want to address the proposed stipulated order that was filed last week. It already feels like it's been longer than that. The proposed stipulated order, and we will be having a meeting with you all, or inviting you all to a meeting next week to answer questions, but I do just want to give you kind of a preview of what is in that order. The order requires generally 3 things. It requires the city to hire an external force investigation team, which we're calling the EFIT, to both participate in and, if necessary, to assume responsibility for use of force investigations. These investigations will be evaluated by the monitoring team, just like APD's use of force investigations are evaluated by the monitoring team. The goal is for these individuals to be experts in the field who can essentially do on-the-job monitoring and training, mentoring and training of APD force investigators, and ensure that they are conducting complete, thorough investigations that are supported by a preponderance of the evidence. help us address some process issues that we were experiencing at APD with regard to use of force investigations, and if necessary, to make recommendations to APD regarding the ultimate findings of those cases. They will also help evaluate APD force investigators and ensure that APD force investigators are conducting investigations that are thorough, complete, and once APD force investigators have been shown to be able to do that through quarterly reports, quarterly evaluations, the APD force investigators will begin to be able to assume responsibility for investigations without the support of EFIT investigators. So in a very quick nutshell, that's the first requirement of the order. Another requirement of the order is that APD hires or ensures that we have 25 force investigators in Internal Affairs Force Division. And that number is generally based on some staffing studies and the fact that we have over 600 uses of force a year that that Internal Affairs Force Division must investigate, and as well as the time requirements within the collective bargaining agreement. And we also agreed to additional training. So the city must work to identify a contractor to help APD develop training that can be then delivered to all use of force investigators. We've experienced some turnover there, so there's definitely a training. There are both training gaps and then lack of training for the newer folks that are in there. So we need to evaluate that or to improve the training. With regard to, I'm sorry, I missed one detail. With regard to the EFIT and the investigations, we also agreed to provide more regular reporting to the court, quarterly reporting to the court with regard to certain metrics, including the number of force investigations that are occurring, whether force is in or out of policy, those sort of metrics. So I can answer some questions now if you have some questions regarding the stipulated order, or if you want more time to review it and we can discuss more next week, that's fine with me as well.
Are there any questions for Ms. Van Meter from the board?
I have one quick question.
Go ahead.
Can you give me a sense for how many sworn police officers we have that are spending their time investigating other police officers?
Sure. So right now in Internal Affairs Force Division, there are 15, well, there are 16 and one's about to leave. So there will be 15 investigators. There's a certain number of supervisors as well. And my understanding is that there are 6 right now in Internal Affairs Professional Standards, which looks at issues other than force. So I know that you hear other numbers. The Compliance Bureau, there was a number going around a couple years ago, maybe it was just last year, about 61 people, but that number actually included everyone in the Compliance Bureau, including the Crisis Intervention Unit, and then people who didn't have any responsibility to investigate force as well. So that number was a little bit misleading. So with regard to actual investigators, I guess that makes it 21 currently, and we're hoping to add at least 10 to that number.
And do we have any sense for how that compares to comparable police departments?
Yeah, I think we have a sense that it is pretty similar. So we know that with regard to, and I cannot remember, I want to say it's Baltimore, whose force, and I could be getting this wrong, and maybe Director Harness has a better sense on numbers as well, but I believe Baltimore could be a different location, has about 3,000 sworn officers, and then I think they have, about 3 times as many investigators in their Internal Affairs Force Division in the Internal Affairs Division as we do, which means it's about equal to where we are just when you look at the numbers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on this subject? Any other subjects? So, did you have anything else?
I guess I need to follow up with you with regard to the status of producing documents that are that you've requested to complete your use of force investigations. So my understanding is that maybe for now we're going to look at just producing documents for cases that you specifically request, which I think that will very much help the city. We keep running into snags with regard to producing OBRD, and perhaps the board can consider with regard to the one case that you've already requested for OBRD, whether you need all of the OBRD, including officers who are, sitting watching the perimeter and had nothing to do with the use of force, or whether you, just maybe are interested in the officers who were inside the perimeter and may have had some involvement in the use of force. And the problems that we run into are there are potentially tactical discussions during some of those long periods of time that are challenged to redact, and maybe officers discussing, saying each other's names and those sort of things. So until we get some other protocols in place that might help address whether we need to redact all that information or not, that might speed this process up a little bit more.
Yes, thank you. And we do have this on the agenda for later in the meeting, so that this is good input to have for that discussion, because that's exactly the discussion that we will be having. So, Member Galloway.
Hey, Lindsay, thanks so much. Once upon a time, it's been probably a couple of years now, maybe even a hair longer than that. We had asked for, I won't say we had asked for, but we'd had a discussion with various parties to that. I feel like it was one of those, not at a board meeting, but where we have in the force review people, kind of in that context when we were talking about what data could be pulled and what would have to be redacted from that data. It was around that same time where we had talked about OBRD video and do we really need to have video of an officer rolling out, crime scene tape and watching 30 minutes of that when it had absolutely nothing to do with the use of force. And the pushback came from APD's side, I think, to limiting what we saw. So we were making the request for, more on point video, and they didn't want to be in a position of trying to decide what we would want to see and come up with, well, hey, that video would have been helpful. How come you didn't give us that kind of thing? Which made sense. It totally made sense. So I just kind of wanted to see if those concerns were still there, or if that was maybe individuals' opinions and perceptions that may no longer be relevant to these types of discussions.
Right. So the discussions from my standpoint and from what I've been having, and just the technological challenges with producing those videos have definitely been with the sheer number of hours of video that have to be watched and potentially redacted in order to produce them to you all. So I don't even recall that prior discussion. So maybe it was before my time, which is quite a while ago at this point. So, I apologize. I don't have that context for you.
Any other questions for Attorney Van Meter?
Yeah. So if I understand this correctly, Attorney Van Meter, even if we wanted to have those extra videos ad hoc, for lack of a better term, that would if I understand you correctly, that's going to be a technical challenge as well.
Member Nixon, I may not be understanding your question. And so are you suggesting that perhaps for each use of force investigation that you want to see more videos, you could identify videos for us, and then we could, or at least officers maybe, and we could provide those to you, and whether that would be a challenge? Is that sort of the gist of the question?
Right. In other words, wouldn't need it for every single case at every single time. We may want to say, okay, well, this case we may have some questions on, so we'd like to see more of the video. Whereas the effort for the officers to redact the videos so that tactical discussions and anything else that they deem necessary to redact can be done, but it's not so much just for every single video, but in the event that extensive information wants to be gleaned from that particular case, that can be done. Does that still pose a technical challenge?
Right. So the number you've requested video at this point from a particular case that has several officers involved and several hours of video. And so because this one particular case was an officer involved shooting with those circumstances, it is presenting a challenge to get all of that redaction done in a timely manner for you all. So it does help to not have to do it for every video for every case. And I think that if you all have maybe considered reviewing the, I'm sorry, I accidentally muted myself. If you all have considered reviewing the materials you get on an ad hoc basis and deciding case by case, that helps. And also maybe within the case, maybe specific videos that you believe would be helpful, or a specific period of time that you would be helpful, that you believe would be helpful, that would just generally cut down the amount of video that we have to produce for you and redact unless and until we get maybe an agreement in place with regard to how those videos are handled.
Okay. And as far as a raw video, raw meaning the video that is not redacted, is that kept or archived for a certain amount of time so that it is available?
For these cases, it is archived, and I do not know that there's any deletion date. So I believe you're good on that. For cases that are not marked as evidence, there's a 120-day deletion period, but that would not be any of these use of force cases.
Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate your that information, and I when we get to this as discussion, one of the things I'd like to find out or explore is how we would relay this information to you. I mean, what kind of a working process do we need to develop in order to identify the kind of video that we want, or and the limits? Because I think that seems to me, if you have to review every video to determine whether it's something that needs to be sent, then almost, that's a lot of work in and of itself without really accomplishing, and then you throw most of that away. I mean, or don't furnish most of that because it's not important. So maybe what we need to do is create some kind of a liaison group through the CPOA to, somehow decide how to select the videos that we're interested in.
Chair Dr. Cass, I'm happy to stick around for your discussion, and I don't think it's my place to volunteer anybody for anything, but it might be more simple than that, given that Director Harness sits in on the Force Review Board and has the opportunity just to look at all the videos, and he might be able to help direct the board toward relevant, useful videos. But if that doesn't work out, I'm happy to stick around for your discussion, and if I can be of any help at that point in time, I'll be here.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next item, and then if you'd like to stick around, we'd be happy to have you. So I'm looking to make sure we didn't skip anybody. SAR. All right, so we're at the report from the CPCs.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're having a good afternoon, good day. We had a busy month last month, and into the beginning of this month, we had our normal council meetings, and our focus at the beginning of the month was, of course, the three-way interview for our chief of police, which was public on January 23rd. January 21st, we had the meeting for the Southeast Council, which had 53 attendees. Alicia Manzano spoke about the police chief search, and Corey Lowe spoke about our IMR 12. Valley had their meeting January 28th. This was after the meeting. Once again, we had Alicia Manzano speaking about what were the criteria and who is going to be deciding upon the resumes and that sort of thing. And Mike Pooley spoke about this further, and he also spoke about the CASA, which led to a pretty interesting discussion between viewers and himself. On February 3rd, the Southwest had their meeting with 87 attendees, 73 by the way in Valley, 87 attendees. Pastor David Walker spoke. We also had Chief Medina speak on a variety of topics. Commander Espinosa had a presentation on community policing, which led to a question and answer session. The Violence Intervention Program, we got a presentation from Commander Langwit, and also Jerry Bachicha, the program manager, and Angel Garcia of Social Services. And this being 30 Days of Nonviolence in Albuquerque, we had 2 speakers on this topic.
Post-event. So it's a tracking mechanism for the RTCC and for the databases for APD.
And that's important in a use of force investigation at FRB. Why?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, because the Force Review Board wants to know that this information is being tracked. It's for their overall evaluation of the case. For those purposes, it's not. This isn't a court of law where previous or similar bad acts may or may not come into play for a decision for guilt. This is an evaluation of whether or not force was appropriate. And the Force Review Board is supposed to examine all the aspects of a force investigation, including the tracking of subjects involved in force incidents.
Okay. All right. I may have questions about that again at some point in the future. But the last thing from this one that I had was the photos of the woman from the event. Her clothes were different in the photos that were taken by DSI or whoever that is that does that than what she was wearing during the use of force incident. Was there any explanation given as to why that was? Like, did she change? Was there?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, no, I don't recall having those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion about this case? Seeing no further discussion, I'd call the roll in favor of accepting the findings in 20-0006203. Member Armio Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so this case is accepted 6-0. So we're at case 20-0007881. Director Harness, please.
Chair Dr. Cass, this case 20-0007881 occurred January 25th, 2020. Previous calls from the occupants of the home was that this individual was not allowed at the home and there was a protective order, I believe. Probation was contacted and a probation warrant was issued. On this date, when the incident occurred, officers arrived, found the subject there. While on scene, the subject had a knife on his belt, and this involved the use of an electronic control weapon over recycles. So that makes it a piece of force. The Force Review Board found it to be in policy, and I concurred with the Force Review Board findings.
Do we have a motion to accept 20-0008932?
So moved.
Sorry, it's 20-000788881, right?
I'm sorry. Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
So moved.
All right, 20-0007881. Yes, second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, roll call. Member Armia Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So this case is approved 6-0. So now we are at 20-0008932. Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, 20-0008932. This occurred January 28th of 2020. It involved the takedown of a handcuffed subject with a level 3 use of force. The Force Review Board found this to be in policy, and I concur with the findings.
We have a motion to accept case 20-0008932.
So moved.
Second.
All right, discussion. We'll call the roll for in favor of accepting the findings in this case. Member Armia Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell. You're muted. I'm sorry, you're still muted.
Sorry. I'm going to abstain on this one because apparently I missed this one and did not review it.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So this case has passed has been accepted. The findings have been accepted 5-0 with 1 abstention. So we are at case 20-0009181.
Move to approve.
1 second, please. Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, 20-0009181. This event occurred on January 29th, 2020. This involved the accidental tasing of a handcuffed subject, making it a level 3. The Force Review Board found this to be within policy. I questioned the original use of the electronic control weapon because the officer states that he saw that the subject was armed and he tased him because the subject had a gun in his belt. My review of that officer's OBRD to me indicated that he seemed to be surprised when the subject told him he had a gun after he had been tased and was being placed in the handcuffs. There isn't any other evidence to have it go one way or the other. It's just my interpretation of the officer's surprise when the subject tells him that he's armed. That to me would indicate that he did not see a weapon before he tased him. The Force Review Board, however, found that this force was within policy. And I would, given the facts and what's available at best, I would say that this would be a not sustained as opposed to a sustained finding, because it's not, I don't believe there's a preponderance of evidence to say that the initial tasing was out of policy.
Do we have a motion to accept the findings in this case?
Sorry about jumping the gun earlier, but move
all right.
to accept the findings.
Second.
All right, discussion. I did notice there was the second use of the taser, which was accidental, was found to be unreasonable and not within policy. And right?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, but it was only, it was resigned to a training issue because it was a newly issued taser. I'm sorry. I stand corrected.
Well, but I thought you were referring to the earlier. I'm
I
just
was
trying to get
referring-
clarity.
I'm
Right.
sorry, Dr. Cass. Yes, I was referring to the initial tasing before you put him in handcuffs. So I think at best, given the information that's available and my review of the file, it would be a not sustained on that original use of the ECW, which would be a level 2 and not a level 3. But the Force Review Board determined that that was within policy, that initial case. Sorry, I had to just pull my dog.
So, I don't know that we, I think the motion that we have on the floor is to accept the findings of the Force Review Board. Is that, I believe. And so the question is, if we vote for the motion to accept the findings of the Force Review Board, then that contradicts your findings or your recommendation. Is that correct? I just want to be clear on this. So given that amount of discussion, given that information, is there any more discussion about this case? Looking. So you're all right. So you're unmuted, Member Mitchell. But do you have anything you wanted to say, or were you just not? Okay. All right, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't skipping over you. All right. So yeah, Member Emilio Pruitt.
So if we want to concur with Director Harness's recommendation, then that would be a separate process, or we would vote this, and if it does not pass to accept the findings, then we would talk about that as an option. Is that the way this would go?
I think that's, I mean, we can vote on this motion and if it doesn't pass, then we can have a motion to accept, alternate findings or accept the findings of the director if that's what the board decides. Was there some, any other discussion, questions? All right, so I'd call the roll to accept the findings of the FRB in this case. So in favor, Member Armio Pruitt.
No.
Member Mitchell. Member Galloway.
No.
Member Mitchell.
No.
Member Nixon.
No.
Member Olivas.
No.
And the chair votes no. So now we've not accepted the findings. We've voted to not accept the findings of the FRB. Is there a motion to accept the recommendations of the director in this case?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Seeing no discussion, call the roll to accept the recommendations of the director in this case. Remember,
Dr. Cass,
yes.
Point of clarity. I just want to get a point of clarity from Dr. Harness, of Director Harness. You were talking about the first tase as opposed to the second tase. Is that correct?
Chair, Dr. Cass, Member Nixon, that's correct. The initial use of the electronic control weapon, my finding would be not sustained. I don't, my decision in that is based upon the officer's reaction after the subject tells him that he has a weapon. To me, that doesn't indicate that the officer saw a weapon, but I don't have any other evidence to contradict that, so that's why I would say not sustained. There's not a preponderance of evidence to sustain the out of policy use of force of the ECW for the first use.
Any more discussion?
No, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, call the roll to accept the recommendation of the director. Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Nixon,
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So the recommendations of the director in this case, 20-000918 have been accepted. So we're moving on to case 20-0010100. If I got that right. Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, 20-00101000. This event occurred the 1st of February, 2020. The use of force was a handcuffed takedown, making it a level 3. The Force Review Board found it to be in policy, and I agreed with the Force Review Board findings.
Do we have a motion to accept the Force Review Board findings in this case?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing no discussion in this case, I call the roll. Member Armijo Pruitt,
Yes.
Member Galloway,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
Yes.
Member Nixon,
Yes.
Member Olivas,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So the findings of the Force Review Board in case 20-0010100 are accepted 6-0. Moving on to cases 20-0011970 and 20-0011924 with Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, 20-001111924. And second case number 20-001111970. This was a tactical event that involved a canine apprehension. The force was found to be within policy, and I concur with the Force Review Board's finding.
Do we have a motion to accept the findings of the Force Review Board?
So moved.
Second? All right, it's moved and seconded. Discussion? Member Galloway?
Just a question, Director Harness. In the presentation, it used the term kill zone. What is a kill zone?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, that's an area of danger where if entered without cover, officers would be subject to harm.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion about this case? Seeing no seeing no further discussion, call the roll to accept the findings in these joint cases 20-0011970 and 20-0011924. Member Armijo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So the findings in these two cases are supported 6-0. Right, we are at cases 20-0027033 and 20-0027063. Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, 20-0027033 and 20-0027063. This event occurred March 27th, 2020. This was another tactical activation where the subject eventually exited the residence and was shot with 40mm sponge round. Initially, I thought that this would be, Initially, I thought it was out of policy. The Force Review Board found it to be in policy. But as I examined the things that the officers knew regarding documented threats and previously being armed, I find this to be in policy.
Do we have a motion to accept the findings of the Force Review Board for these two cases?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Member Mitchell, or you unmuted yourself? Okay, that's fine. Looking for any other discussion. All right. I thought it was interesting that they identified making a hole in a window is a communication portal. But that's
Chair, Dr. Cass, that's pretty common that that they'll do that, and then sometimes it's used not only for projection of sound, but also to use throw phones to get cellular phone devices into an area to try and establish communications.
I guess it's the police vernacular that I found interesting. So that, yes, yeah, all right. Well, any discussion on this case? Right, so I'll call the roll for accepting the findings of the Force Review Board in this case. Member Amia Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Levis.
Yes.
Chair votes yes. So the findings in cases 20-00270033 and 20-00270063 have been accepted. And if I didn't say it, the chair votes yes. They're accepted unanimously, 6-0. So we're at the end of the case, the special use of force cases, or serious use of force cases, and I would suggest we take a break until 7:30. So it's now 7:17, so we'll have a 13-minute break. Are we good? So GovTV will be back at 7:30. Okay, this is the meeting of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board for Albuquerque, and we're returning from break. We are now at item 10 on the agenda, reports from subcommittees. So, Community Outreach Subcommittee, Member Galloway.
Okay, so my report was attached to the meeting invitation. There's nothing really outside of that that I think we need to go over, and nothing super major going on with outreach right now. So unless there's any questions, our next outreach meeting is scheduled for March 23rd via Zoom.
Any questions for Member Galloway? So, seeing no questions, we'll move on to Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee report. I also attached the report for your review. There are a couple of highlights that I would like to point out, and that is that there's recent legislation which has been introduced in the New Mexico legislature, which is actually called Senate Bill 227, which mirrors the legislation or the use of force policies and de-escalation techniques that APD has already implemented, per the CASA. And so, and one other thing it does do is this Senate bill would also prohibit no-knock search warrants, which is essentially a policy which I've been assured, doesn't happen, or no-knock searches no longer happen at APD. But I think it's worth pointing out that what APD has been engaged in is something positive in terms of public safety and law enforcement, and I think this state legislation is a good example of that, or the fact that it's taken as something positive for law enforcement, and it would apply the same, very similar policies around to all the law enforcement states within the state. The other highlight that I wanted to point out was that there was an article which I sent out to the board today that mentioned Albuquerque in terms of their relationship to the U.S. Marshals, and that this actually, the article is primarily about U.S. Marshal Service and how the U.S. Marshal Service is not subject to quite the same restrictions as normal as other police agencies or local police agencies. And one of the things that it mentions here is that Albuquerque had withdrawn from the task force with U.S. Marshals because their standards for use of force were different. One other thing that I think, one positive thing that's come out of this is that the U.S. Marshal Service is now requiring that they use on-body recording devices, which they hadn't previously. So our next meeting is February 4th at, March 4th at 4:30. So case review, Member Nixon.
Thank you, Chairman Cass. So this is my first go around as far as being the chairman. And it's a good thing I kind of had some couple of softball cases in there, because in interacting with Valerie, I realized that there were some things that were missing and kind of chaotic on that. So I apologize for that. And thanks for working with me on that, Valerie. But as far as the cases were concerned, pretty straightforward on the three. I believe, I'm assuming that you guys have a copy of the audit report. I don't really have anything to go over, but I can share that if you'd like me to. On the report, but basically the first two cases, there were no findings on that, as a matter of fact, and they were pretty straightforward. Those are the cases that are listed there: 097-20 and 160-20. One of those cases, which is, I believe, the Walmart complaint, where the officer had parked in front of Walmart, or the police car was parked in front of Walmart. And after looking at that, of course, this is one that we had reviewed before. I didn't see anything. I didn't see any obstruction or any issues with that. So of course we agreed or concurred with the findings on that particular case. And then the other case, I think that was 097-20. Same thing on the findings. We didn't have any issue with those findings on that case as well. And as a matter of fact, there was I don't think we had a whole lot of information to look at on that case. So it was closed as well. And there was attempts for the, I believe the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Harness, to get in touch with the individual and send some correspondence, and they never received any feedback from it. So that was pretty much a done deal. That was closed. So on those two cases, are there any questions? 097-20 and 160-20. Okay, so moving on. Wait, did I see anybody's hand? Okay. So moving on to the last case, which was 225-20. Again, there were no findings at this point to kind of push back on, but as an individual, I looked at this, and I'm going to bring some things up in a later venue. I don't think it's appropriate to do it at this point, given that the case review board has already, ruled on this, and we didn't find anything out of order. But one of the concerns I had after the fact was that they transported a suspect, and I'm calling him a suspect, that may be the wrong term, but they transported him away from the initial stop point of contact to get away from individuals who were bystanders that were videotaping. And so there was some controversy with the officer. The officer felt that he was being baited by them, and they were not in a position that was conducive to him feeling safe. So on a non-arrest transport to another location was done. And we'll talk, I mean, I don't have to bring it up right now, but I would like to look at policies at some point. I'll take that on myself to look at SOPs and policies for transporting an unarrested suspect to a different location. If anybody has anything to chime in on that, I'm fine with that. We could do that now, or like I said, I can table that and move that to another discussion that I can open up as an agenda item later on, or once I do some research on it. But other than that, again, we went with the findings of the investigator and the CPOA and left it at that. Questions? So I'll be making some adjustments, some slight adjustments to the actual template for the audit reports. Well, one of the main things is getting a functioning table of contents. For some reason, maybe it was my computer or something, I wasn't able to get that to function. So I'll be making that very minor adjustment so that it's a little bit more readable. And that's all I have, Dr. Cass, unless anyone has any questions for me. Yes, Member Galloway.
It's more for Director Harness. I noticed in this audit report, the investigators' reports are listed in here. I don't know if you saw that, and I don't know if you have any feelings one way or the other. I think also probably, I don't know if the delivery confirmation post needs to be in there, but do you have any feelings one way or the other about the investigators' reports being included in here? Would you prefer they not be? I don't, just kind of asking.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Galloway. I'm not sure what you're referring to because I did not review the submission from the CRC chair as yet.
It's the investigative reports that are in the files. It's a screenshot essentially of the investigative report that you get from your investigators.
Yeah, that would be problematic. That would need to be gone through and redacted if it's going to be produced as a document as a part of these.
Yeah, I would think so. If it's all right with you, Member Nixon, perhaps you and I can work on this together one more time and before we produce the final one to be approved by the board.
Okay, we can do that.
That's all right.
I had a couple of questions on that, especially when it comes to what documents are supposed to be maintained or attached, should I say, to the actual report. I wouldn't mind having a checklist to go by. I'm a checklist guy. So maybe I'll develop that as well when I collaborate with you on it. So thank you for that offer.
Of course. So if it's all right with you, I would like to table this particular approval of this audit for next month.
Yes, that's fine. So just keep in mind that we'll have two for approval in the next meeting, possibly.
It'll just be the one.
It'll just be the one? Okay.
I think in terms of this, we have an item on the agenda for the review and approval, so I think for that finding, so I think we can delay that until then. This is just the report for the case review committee. So if there's no further questions, thank you, and we'll move on, and you'll get another chance at this audit report question. So we are to personnel subcommittee member Olivas.
Yes, thank you, Chair Dr. Cass. The Personnel Subcommittee did meet on the 25th of January. We also had a special meeting this past Monday, the 8th of February. Our January meeting was a follow-up meeting with the Council of Chairs. We were the CPC Council of Chairs. This was per some guidance from the board to look into including them in our evaluation of the executive director. It did seem like we may be a little bit premature to solicit their input. They're still in the process of drafting an MOU. I'm not sure if that's happened or been executed between the councils and the agency, but it seems that right now some of their core difficulties are basically in defining that relationship. So we agreed that we would reach out to them after a couple of more months and see where they're at, see how things are going, and see where we can help and where we can integrate from there. Again, this was mainly focusing on plugging them into our evaluation process somehow, and it seemed like we may have been a little bit premature, although we did get some input from one member that appeared receptive to us simply making some recommendations as to how we would integrate them rather than soliciting their input on how that was done. I think they were just a little bit unsure on sort of what they expected from the director and the agency, and therefore they had a hard time sort of defining how they would evaluate that or what they would evaluate. So I still think it's a good idea to give them some more time. So we will follow up with that on that as a committee. We've also been soliciting reports monthly from the director on staffing at the agency, as well as follow up on various member requests that are made at the board meetings, including letters and other requests that are made by the board or by individual board members. Just trying to keep those lines of communication open between the director and the board through the personnel committee. And I think those have been successful in some ways to keep that communication flowing. As far as the evaluation, the 2019 evaluation report was delivered to City Council, and the letter was delivered to the director. And then the 2020 evaluation, I do want to say big kudos to Amanda Bustos at the agency for her help getting that evaluation off the ground. It was distributed on the 4th, and we ended collection, don't know the exact date, but just a few weeks later. So I think that we're very timely in distributing that and also ensuring that members and staff were actually evaluating only the previous year rather than potentially other time periods when it's distributed later in the year. So we did close collection. All board members responded to that, and I believe we also had all staff members and the director. So we had a good response to that. And I look forward to sharing more of those findings with you all as we finalize our process within the personnel committee. Basically, our special meeting that we held this week dealt with just taking an initial look at the data, and then also requesting a few other items that we needed from the agency, from the director, to fill out our matrix and report so that we have all the data that's needed to produce an evaluation per the criteria that were approved by the board. So the director has largely gotten us all of that data through the annual report and some other items we requested. So I do expect that at our regular meeting here in February, we will be able to substantially complete that evaluation and produce that for the board, hopefully at the March meeting, assuming that things in February go well. Otherwise, our next meeting is February 22nd, where again, we hope to finalize that evaluation at the committee level and produce that for the board. It's time for questions.
So if there are no questions for Member Olivas, we will move on to item 11, discussion possible action items. First item is the draft January to June 2020 semi-annual report, which has been posted on the website, on SharePoint, I believe. Okay. And it's now available for member review. So I turn this over to you, Director Harness. I believe this is sort of the first review before the board has a chance to, or at what point do we want, would you ask for the board acceptance of this report? I mean, I think we're, so I'll let you talk.
Here, Dr. Cass, you're on the clock.
Okay.
30 days to review the report. We'll bring it back next month for approval for submission to the appropriate city agencies.
So that was the main reason to get this on the agenda, is to get this, to start the clock. And so we're on notice that 30 days to review this, and next month we will make a decision on accepting it. So is there any discussion, any questions? Member Olivas.
Thank you, Chair Cass. Director Harness, I was just curious as to what do you think the anticipated timeline on the second half of 2020 is? Or are we, it looks like this one was about 6 months from June to January to produce it. Are we looking about the same timeline for the next one, expecting that in, say, June?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas. No, we're getting shorter turnaround times now that our data analyst is essentially caught up now. There isn't a backlog on these semi-annual reports. It's a matter of getting the content. So I wouldn't anticipate that it would be that long, but the suggested time for it would be, according to the monitor, around April 15th.
Great. Well, I don't mean that in any way as a slight or an insult to the agency, because I've seen substantial improvement on the timelines since I started on the board. I think in mid 2019 when I started. A few months later, we were approving the 2018 reports. So we've certainly gotten more timely in that regard, but it's now gone from 6 months from at least a year or more. So I think it's kudos to you and your staff and the work you're doing on that. So look forward to seeing that.
Any other questions? If not, then we'll move to item B, which is a review and approval of the case audit findings report. So Member Nixon, I think you've got an idea of what Member Galloway would like to do. So
Agreed. Go ahead, Member Galloway.
So I just make a motion that we table this to March.
A second.
Discussion. So all in favor of tabling the approval of the case audit findings and report till the March meeting? Member Armijo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So it's motion's made to table this. It's passed unanimously. So we'll pick this back up in March. All right. Item C, which is CPOA board member reviews. This is kind of an update. I have had my review with Member Mitchell, and if it's still on, we have a review scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow with Member Nixon. So I just want to make sure he hears what I'm saying, because that was, I didn't get confirmation from our last email that it looked like that was the time that was available to both Director Harness and myself. So is that still good with you, Member Nixon?
Absolutely. And I apologize for that. I thought I did send it back.
No problem. As long as we're good, then we'll do that tomorrow. And then I would like to get this, next week I'd like to schedule 2 interviews. And so if Member Armia Pruitt and Member Galloway have, can provide some times as when there might be available, we could do those 2. And then there would just be myself and Member Olivas, and I think we'll probably interview each other for an hour. So if you could, you can do this offline, but if you can give me some times when you're available next week, Member Armia Pruitt and Member Galloway, please. So that's all I really had. If there's any questions, if there's no questions, if you just email me, I'll be happy. If there's no questions, we'll move on. So we are at item D, which is which the chair put on here, which is to review the responsibility for responses to the CPOA board email. And I just, as some background to this, it's been, I believe, July of 2018, where the board passed a policy that would ask the director to reply to all emails which were addressed to the board, and to inform the board of the reply within 7 days. It seems to me that it's time to revisit this, and what I would propose is that we create a process where this rotates among board members as to at least determining who should provide a response to emails which are directed to the board, so that if it turns out it's the best response can come from the director, then that would be appropriate then to organize the response in that way. If it turns out that the member who has this duty for a given month, for example, gets a response that they need more information about, then they can field this and try to ask the right people on the board to what the best way to respond would be. And I would suggest that we would coordinate this with Valerie in the office, so that at least she would keep us on track as to who was the next assigned person to do this duty. So that's my proposal. We can put this in the, if we want to think about this for another period, I'm willing to sort of table it and come back with a firmer plan. But I wanted to get it before the board because I think it's something that would involve board members in board business and relieve some of this responsibility from the director. So,
do you have a sense, Dr. Cass or Director Harness, what kind of volume are we talking about? Do we get a lot of that, or is it sporadic? Or
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Mitchell, it's sporadic. And I wouldn't say it's more than a handful a month. And most of the time, there's the CPOA is copied in those emails as well. And then of course, if it's some sort of an IPRA request, then that would come. All you do is just send that to me, and then the system takes over the notifications. So it's not overdue. not burdensome, overly burdensome, I should say. I don't think. So
I guess the only other question I would have is, I know we've been having some discussions about who should speak for the board under what circumstances. So is this part of that discussion? Because I thought we were trying to limit or narrow who would be responding to inquiries and not have it just to anybody on the board. So maybe these are totally separate issues. I'm not clear on that.
well, Chair Dr. Cass, Member Mitchell, I think that issue, it could be a combined issue. I think they are separate issues, though. The issue that went to outreach subcommittee was around the idea of inquiries and having a spokesperson for the board. But I suppose email response could be lumped into that as well.
I see them as separable issues. I mean, I think we have a kind of a working system that if it's a CPOA, if it's a board-wide response that they're asking for, then it's a CPOA that, you know, is in the best position to at least, you know, make the initial response. I think if it's sort of an individual board member question, you know, or one that might best be answered by an individual board member, then I think that's what we're trying to identify. So, Member Pruitt.
Dr. Cass, I'm kind of curious. We don't get that many emails, and they're almost never something that's, in my experience, that's like a particular board member would be able to answer, or it would have been addressed to the board member. I guess I'm wondering, like, this feels like creating a rotation, then you're going to need to create some procedural rules around who handles what and what appropriate responses are for different things, and how many of us check this email daily. So I guess I'm kind of coming back to, it doesn't feel like it's a huge onerous task. And I'm wondering why are we seeking to find a way to distribute something that's a very light task to begin with? And I wonder about things falling through the cracks if we start saying, it's this month it's my time, and that month it's Doug's time, and everybody's going to have a different level of responsiveness and information with which to even disseminate. I kind of wonder if it wouldn't best be held by someone from the CPOA, whether that is Ed or Valerie, to at least, because they get all those same emails, right? And so it does seem like having a point person who's one of the salaried people that are regularly checking their work emails to handle this might be the best case scenario. And then if there's something that is like, oh, that's a personnel committee issue, Valerie or Ed could send it off to Eric, or if this should be looked at by outreach. The CPOA has the most knowledge about things and the most paid time to deal with things, and it's not an onerous task. So I guess I'm just wondering what the impetus is for this.
All right. I think the main impetus was that it is to try to tailor tailor answers from the POB that are directed, that are questions directed at the POB. So, I mean, I put this on because, I think it was time to revisit the issue, and I think it's, it's worth, raising the issue, and, we can, and we don't need to make a decision tonight, but we can, certainly, I wanted to get it before the board. So, Member Galloway.
Is there an actual problem that we're trying to solve that's come of this, or is this like a hypothetical, this could be a problem?
I think I'm not sure that there's an actual problem. I mean, I think the question is whether whether the answer that the CPOA provides is what the POB also would provide. And if we have, if the question is directed to the POB and we're asking the CPOA to answer it and we disagree with that answer, then that's a real problem. And so how do we, so that's
fair.
That's where it comes from. So Member Olivas.
Yeah, I guess I kind of fall somewhere in the middle here. I see the idea of taking some responsibility on the part of the board for some of this correspondence, given that, in the past, not frequently, but I think there has been some criticism that, this isn't timely, or why didn't we respond to this email differently, or why didn't we respond in general? And we being directed to the agency, why didn't the agency do it? It does make the board accountable for that if in fact it's more of a board response, which is, I think, rare in my experience. And we all do get these emails, just as a reminder. You see them, they'll occasionally come through. It's pretty rare that the general POB gets an email that's outside of, maybe the director or one of us or something like that. But I think it does happen, and I like this idea in the sense that it puts us in a bit of accountability, but I'm not sure I like the idea of rotating monthly or weekly or something like that. I think that adds a lot of unnecessary, changes and awareness, and I wonder if maybe this is something that's better assigned perhaps to the outreach committee or something like that, if that is in fact the outreach arm of the board. Maybe that's an outreach function. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as kind of a counter proposal, but I guess I see the general idea. I'm not sure that it actually reduces the workload on the agency by measurable amount, but it also increases the accountability on us as a board to be responsive. So I guess I see the point.
All right, I appreciate those comments, and I think what I would like to do is withdraw this item, and I think I've accomplished what I would like to do initially, which is to raise the issue. I think that's a good suggestion to that perhaps it's an outreach function, and we can, but I'm willing to withdraw it and reconsider it at a later time. So. And maybe we can, outreach might take this on to give it some thought themselves as to whether this might be an appropriate response for the outreach committee. So I guess I would like to leave it at that, withdraw the item and ask outreach to take a look at the proposal. Is that, as the chair of the outreach committee, Member Galloway, is that acceptable?
I'm completely fine with that. I can very easily see that being something that the same person who's designated to be the representative and coordinate with the agency on any kind of comment, I can see that very naturally falling together with the same person who would respond to emails. So that's totally fine.
Okay, so then we'll move on to the next item. So, and given that this is an outreach, the outreach committee will take this on as a task. All right, so we are at item E, I believe, request for training academy briefing on interviews. This is your item, Member Galloway.
Yeah. So I would make a motion to extend an invitation to the APD Training Academy command staff to come before the board at the March 11th, 2021 meeting, provide an update on any steps taken to provide training to field officers with regard to conducting interviews of children to determine the need for CAC resources, as well as conducting interviews of women who are victims of sexual or domestic violence.
I second that.
Discussion? Director Harness.
Yes. here, Dr. Cass, I would like to make the motion more gender neutral because there are victims of domestic violence that are not women.
Absolutely fair point, well made. So conducting interviews of victims of sexual or domestic violence. Amendment to the motion. Thank you, Director. Director Harness.
Any more discussion, further discussion on this motion of Member Galloway's as friendly amended? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, Member Armijo Pruitt?
Yes.
Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Nixon?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. All right, so we are at so this motion passed unanimously, 6-0. We're at item G, developing a process for access to level 3 force cases.
Point of order, I believe we're at item F on the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, item F. Sorry, I skipped you. Member
Not
Olivas.
me.
I skipped Member Olivas.
Thank you. So a bit of background here before I make a motion. This is in regards to some amendments that were proposed and passed to our policies and procedures that restrict the use of legal counsel to the director or the chair of the board. And in this case, I believe that as you'll see in a moment, I would like to request access to legal counsel to discuss an issue that I believe I would like to have some discretion on, to not disclose to those two individuals at this point in time, to seek legal counsel's advice on how this issue might affect the board and how it might overlap with our policies and procedures and ordinance. So seeking an interpretation on that. So that being said, I make a motion to request the board grant access to limited discussions with legal counsel to solicit an opinion on a matter between board members.
I second.
Second.
All right, discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of granting access to legal counsel by Member Armijo Pruitt?
Yeah, so I guess I'm unclear here. I mean, obviously, seeking some discretion here. But I thought the intent of the original policy was for that we were supposed to bring things to the board to discuss whether it was legitimate to take something to the lawyer, and then whether that, because that was going to impact budgets. So like personally, I don't really need to know, because I really didn't think that we needed to tighten this up in this way to begin with. So long as the chair agreed with the outreach, I thought that was enough of a bottleneck. But I guess, is there any cap on the amount of time? Or I guess I don't know what it is we're actually approving here.
I guess I'm the only one that can give any any clarity to that. I don't anticipate this to be a lengthy legal opinion. I don't anticipate this will require review of Supreme Court case law or New Mexico statutes or, hours and hours and hours of legal billing. I think this is a matter of probably a brief telephone conversation with this particular information, and probably a short delay and then a brief response after reviewing the policies and the ordinance. So I hear your point, and I was the original sponsor of that motion to restrict this use. So I see that it is restrictive, although I support it because I think this still offers a check on the unhinged use of counsel to solicit, for example, research on lengthy legal briefs.
And I'll offer this in discussion. I'll cut him some slack. Yes, Director Harness.
Chair Dr. Cass, is this because this would appear to include some attorney-client privileged discussion, and I have no idea what the foundation of this is. Is this not appropriate for a closed session with the board to ferret out these issues to determine whether or not this is the proper use of counsel?
So myself not being a legal scholar or any well-informed in this, that's part of the reason why I'm soliciting this opinion before bringing this to a special session, or I'm sorry, a closed session of the board, because I'm not sure that it falls into a category that would even be appropriate for that restricted use of the board's time, which has strict definitions by OMA and IPRA. So that's, you know, part of the reason why I'm soliciting this. Again, I think this is probably a short answer.
Council Gooch.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, Director Harness. I don't know either, but I will say that I don't think we're quite in a closed session arena, because that is limited, as Member Olivas has pointed out, to threat or pending litigation or a personnel issue. And as weird as it is for me as your lawyer to provide legal, otherwise attorney-client privileged communications and open meetings, that's the nature of this beast. So I don't think where we sit right now for this discussion that we need to worry about a closed session. I will stop y'all if we get there, but at this point, I think we're fine for the board to continue its discussion and take a vote.
Member Armia Pruitt.
So I could be wrong, but I think what Director Harness was saying is that this could be like the thing he's requesting access to the lawyer for. Could it not just be addressed in closed session? I think that's what Director Harness may have been saying, but maybe I'm misunderstanding him.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armia Pruitt, I think as a pre-judgment as to decision, I think that's what I'm saying, because I have no idea what the issues are. So,
and I think part of where this comes from, and maybe this is something that Council Gooch can even answer right here, is the statute narrowly defines that these sessions are to be used for, again, pending litigation. This does not fall into one of those categories. I'm quite certain of that category. And the other category being a personnel matter, but are board members considered personnel? Because in my interpretation of that, the only personnel are members of staff and agencies such as the director or other staff.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas. The answer is I used to know. I've looked into this before. I can find you an answer, but off the top of my head, I cannot tell you the answer because it isn't quite as straightforward as one would think. Of course, that's a lot of times. It depends. But again, I agree that we have to be careful with our closed session items. And if it's not a pending lawsuit, which I believe Member Olivas has confirmed it is not, a threatened lawsuit, I don't know. And as far as personnel issues, it might be that we need to talk, either the chair and Member Olivas and I'm not sure, to find that out. I'm not trying to be cryptic. I really just don't know what it is we're talking about either, and that's fair. But for purposes of your pending motion, I think you have what you need for the board to continue its discussion or take a vote.
Yes, Director Harness.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cass. I think to maybe alleviate Member Armijo Pruitt's concerns, which I'm hearing, I don't want to speak for Member Armijo Pruitt, perhaps the motion could limit the time to be spent on Member Olivas's issue. So if you have a fair estimate as to the amount of time that you would need for discussion, perhaps you could include that in your motion to alleviate concerns for other board members.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to modify the motion. I'm not totally sure how long this would take, because I think part of it does include that question of whether a board member is personnel or not. But I think 3 hours would be ample amount of time. I hope it shouldn't be more than, and that's not 3 hours of conversation. That's including the time that council would spend potentially researching this issue and coming to a conclusion. So I think that that's the maximum I could foresee.
So are you, let's see, I'm not sure of the process here. Can you amend, you can amend your own motion, you're gonna amend your own motion, but we already, I think we have do we have a second on this? So.
I would restate the motion if the board would allow. So the motion is to grant myself, Member Olivas, a maximum of 3 hours of time to consult with legal counsel on an interpretation of ordinance and policy as it relates to a matter with among the board. Matters among the board.
And is there a second? Who seconded this the first time? I did. I think Member Mitchell did too. So, in any case, there's a motion. I'll second it. It is an amended motion. And any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I call for a vote. Member Armijo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
An uncomfortable yes.
Member Nixon. Member Nixon? Oh.
I mean, sorry. Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So motions pass unanimously, 6-0. So moving on to item G, which was developing a process. Let's see, here we are there. Okay, developing a process to access level 3 force cases. I think we heard from Attorney Van Meter earlier in the meeting that she's willing to participate in this process. I think where we stand right now is I think we've arrived at kind of a working situation, which is to review use of force cases that are not officer-involved shootings with the information that's been made available primarily in PowerPoint presentations. And I believe that there was a further caveat then that if we saw that we could not come to a decision with that information, that we could then bring these up at the board meeting where that case was on the agenda and ask for more information. In the one case where we did where we had an officer-involved shooting, it sounds like there's a lot of potential video tape, or I'm sorry, video recordings, which would be almost as difficult to determine which ones were relevant as to, and then redact those as it would be just to furnish everything redacted. So, so what I'm looking, what was suggested, I believe, was that Director Harness, in reviewing a case at Force Review, had a better feeling for what information would be useful to provide to the board in addition to the PowerPoint presentation. So that's, I think, where I stand is where I'd like to start consideration as to whether that's a workable solution to this problem, is to ask Director Harness for his opinion in terms of whether there's additional information which should be presented to the board in reviewing these cases. So I ask for some input from Director Harness and Ms. Van Meter.
Chair Dr. Cass, I think the solution just popped into my head. With every force review case, the materials that are provided to the reviewers prior to the force review board hearing them. There is a list of what is called pertinent OBRDs. So perhaps that's probably the starting point. So if it's listed as pertinent OBRD for any particular case in which you want to review the investigative file, I think start with that list, and most likely that should be enough information by which you're able to reach a conclusion.
Ms. Van Meter, do you have, would you like to weigh in on this?
I think that's probably a very good parameter to use, and you always have the option of requesting more videos if you review them and still have questions. But you know, this is that's the determination that is made by the Internal Affairs Force Division or the SOD when they review it. I'm not entirely sure if you necessarily get that information. And that helps the board, the Force Review Board, determine which videos to start with as well. So I think it's a very good place to start.
Yes, Member Nixon.
Who determines, Director Harness, who determines whether a video is considered pertinent OBRD?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Nixon, that's determined by the presenter of the Force Review Board presentation. It would be a decision made by the Force Division.
I might add, we already rely on a lot of the judgment of the Force Division as to what, you know, how, in terms of the investigation that was conducted. And so, I mean, we have to trust that there's been a a reasonable investigation, and that we can, if there isn't one, that we can somehow determine that based upon the the material that they give us, which is a little bit, but well, there's a certain element of trust involved here, and it seems to me that until it's misappropriate, it's not appropriate, that might be a way that we can go.
Yeah, Chair Dr. Cass, if I might just interject, excuse me, with every Force Review Board case information on the list of pertinent OBRD, there is also a link to all of the other OBRD that are stored at evidence.com. I have not found an occasion where the pertinent list isn't enough to reach a conclusion.
Would you repeat that, please?
I said I have not found a time when the pertinent list was not adequate to reach a conclusion.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, for all intents and purposes, there is a way to get to whatever video we deem necessary in investigation to look further.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Nixon, yeah, absolutely, because they're all going to be in an investigative file on evidence.com as far as all of the evidence related to the investigation. But for review, there is a list of pertinent OBRD for a particular officer, for a particular incident, and it takes you directly to that video for that involvement. And I haven't had to go to the supplemental list, which is down below, which is a link to the evidence file in evidence.com in order to be able to reach a conclusion for my review.
Okay. And Director Harness, do you know if there is an SOP, a policy that governs the process of redacting video?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Nixon, yes, there is a policy regarding redacting video. but that is for public publication and the dissemination. So yeah, there is a policy. You can go on to Power DMS and you can look at the redaction policy for the OBRD. It'll be in 2-8.
Thank you.
Member Armia Pruitt.
And so for redaction purposes, are we as a board considered the public, or are we considered some other entity that has a different level of redaction?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armia Pruitt, you're actually held to a lesser standard than the public. Because if the public were to request this video via IPRA, it would not be redacted to conceal officer identity. You're held to that standard by the collective bargaining agreement because you are not to know the identity of the officers that you are reviewing.
And do we have an internal policy about our ability to know who the, like, is there, like, if I as a citizen said, I'm gonna I would like to IPRA this video, and then I watch it, but I'm also on this board and I am judging the, voting on the findings of these cases, would I be in violation of anything?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armia Pruitt, yes, you'd be in violation of your confidentiality responsibilities and your responsibilities to adhere to the collective bargaining agreement with the APOA.
Member Galloway.
Also probably in not conducting outside investigations. Our own investigations would probably fall under that as well. Do we know if the new stipulated order is going to affect the FRB process as it stands now?
Can we postpone that discussion until we get to the next item on the agenda?
Sure. I guess I would think that it might fall under this one as well, though, hence the ask.
Well, I mean,
if the FRB process is going to change as a result of the stipulated order, then I would think that this conversation is premature. I guess that would be my point.
Yes, Ms. Van Meter.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Cass and Member Galloway. The stipulated order does not change the FRB process and won't affect this question at all.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion about this? I'm not sure that we need a motion. I think what we're looking for is to try to work out a process. Member Olivas, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a little bit confused on one portion of what was said there. We are held to a standard in the collective bargaining agreement, but we are not a party to the collective bargaining agreement. So I'm a little bit curious about that dubious assertion that we ought to be held to it.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, absolutely, we are a party to the collective bargaining agreement. We were represented by the city of Albuquerque in that negotiation, and we are held to those standards. That's exactly where the timelines come from for investigations for discipline. So absolutely, we are held by the collective bargaining agreement. It is a basis for much of how we conduct the CPOA investigations.
But my point, I think I know the answer to this. It's a question at the same time because I'm not certain, is do we have anyone at that table where those negotiations occur? I believe that our city councilors may be part of that. I'm not certain if that's correct. No, but no one from the agency, obviously not yourself. I don't think anyone on the board was physically present or solicited.
Chair Dr. Katz, member of Olivas, no, you're correct. We were not a part of the negotiation. And years ago, I argued that we didn't have privity with the CBA, therefore we should not be held liable to it and for it. However, the city maintained that because the CPOA is a city organization employed with city employees, therefore they negotiate on our behalf.
However, we are quasi-independent, so I think there's a lot of gray area in there. Clearly, what are you? If you obviously this is off the top of your head, but are there similar standards in other jurisdictions? Other similar jurisdictions, similar size and similar situations?
Chair Dr. Cass, member Nixon, which standards do you mean? Do you mean are the oversight agencies a part of the collective bargaining agreement negotiation team?
Correct.
I'm only aware of one such entity, and that's the Seattle Community Police Commission at this point.
So it is possible, at least it has occurred in some community, though it's probably not widespread, at least not to your knowledge.
That would be correct.
Yeah, member Nixon.
And is it me, or does it seem like that policy kind of hamstrings us from investigating? We've already established that we can get access to any of the video that we request, but is there anything that you guys see where that's going to hamstring us with the stipulation that member Armijo Pruitt had kind of brought up as far as independent investigation per se?
Member, Chair Dr. Cass, member Nixon, the irony of this is not lost on even the city clerk, and we've had discussions about the irony of the public being able to get more access to information than the oversight body. It is a consideration that the city clerk has pledged to bring to the negotiating parties for the CBA. And I have, since day one, in being here, argued that the CBA and the 90 days with the one time extension for 30 days is a hindrance to fact finding for investigations. And I've been pounding that drum since I've been here. There's allegedly some movement on that with the CBA negotiations, but it is something that there's no traction at this point.
Council Van Meter.
Member Cass, I'm sorry, President Cass, Dr. Cass, and Member Olivas. It's late. Your meetings last way too long. I have had discussions with Director Harness about some proposed terms that I think might make a potential MOU with the APOA more palatable to them with regard to this particular term and condition. So there's two issues. First is, as we've discussed, the pertinent OBRD issue, and that's kind of until we get this other potential option sorted out, right? So the pertinent OBRD list will be, assuming we do have to go through and do all the redactions. If we can sort out this other agreement, and I think that in general, it would be helpful if the CPOAB would agree to make sure not to share officers' names during board meetings, make sure not to share video during board meetings, and those sort of issues. Then we can present that information to the APOA, and that might make them feel a little bit more comfortable with not redacting officers' names from the materials provided to the CPOAB for purposes of making your decisions. So with regard to this particular issue, I'm hoping to find a way forward that will make it less burdensome on the staff at APD with regard to producing the videos, give you a little bit more information, and will make the APOA and CPOA be happy. It's always a challenge to get everybody on the same page, but we're working on it.
So what action would you suggest on the part of the CPOAB to, assist in this process?
For right now, there's two things. So one, if you are all okay with me letting APD know with that particular case that you've already requested the video, they can maybe should focus on the pertinent OBRD video. That's the first item. And then the second item would be, I've got to put together a draft MOU to submit to the CPOAB with regard to the treatment of any video. And I've got to continue to work with the APOA to reach that agreement with regard to allowing sharing of officer identity information.
But this is something that you would initiate, and we can agree that we would like to have you work in that direction. Is there anything we need to do to help that out, or can we just wait until you've come up with something and bring it back to see if that's a workable agreement?
Sure, Chair Dr. Cass, that we have two options. Either I can be the person to do the first draft of an MOU, or somebody for the CPOAB can be the person to do the first draft. I'm fine with either scenario. I am a little bit bogged down with other work right now, so if that would speed things up, I would not object at all to somebody else making the first draft, and we can go from there. Whichever works best for the board.
Well, let me defer to Council Gooch if there's any, if she can give us some wisdom here as to what we might do. I don't think within the board, I don't think we're in the position to do that. I think with our attorney, or she certainly is. So let me ask her what her thought would be.
Chair Dr. Cass, Honorable Board, I agree that we need to figure out how to move through this. I am not sure how productive it would be to just start with an MOU until we've actually heard from the APOA if this is a starter or a non-starter. I also have concern that I don't want the board to be exposed to any kind of liability, if you will, depending on how the terms of the MOU would be written, given that your board packets and whatnot are subject to IPRA requests. So there's a lot of parameters I think we can work within. I think maybe the next step is to have Ms. Van Meter, myself, and someone from the APOA have a discussion with Director Harness, maybe the chair, to see where everyone is on the issue, to see if we can get a meeting of the minds before anyone jumps full force into trying to draft something. I want to make sure the board is protected. Everyone understands what everyone's roles need to be.
Does that constitute a plan? Director Harness.
Yes, Chair Dr. Cass, thank you. I just had one question. Didn't the board already sign a confidentiality agreement as an MOU with City Legal that covers this, or did that not get accomplished? I know it was started, so did that not get accomplished?
Chair Dr. Cass, Honorable Board, Director Harness, not to my knowledge, I'm not aware of that ever having been done or finalized by anyone.
Because I think wasn't Attorney Rose working on that earlier?
That was an NDA, I think.
Yeah, same thing.
Okay, well, no, it fell, I think they went on record as not, deciding against that, but okay. Council Van Meter, yes, you're the expert. You have the inside information.
Yes, Chair Dr. Cass, Dr. Harness, at the time that was not a well-received proposal from our on our end. I do think that we can revisit this idea and make sure that it is clear what everyone's intentions are here, and potentially move forward that way. Also, my understanding is all of the IPRA requests for CPOA-B documentation goes through the city clerk's office, which would ensure that all of the information that is not disclosable pursuant to IPRA and other public records laws is still going to be screened out during that process. And I am happy to sit down with Ms. Gooch, Director Harness, Chair Dr. Cass, and whoever else needs to be present to work with the APOA if we think that that's a better starting place on this process.
Any other comments or discussion? It seems to me that we've gotten, yes, Member Olivas, do you have something?
I wanted to add here that, you know, part of our commitment as serving on the board and part of the selection process to selecting members to serve on the board is supposedly to select members who shall be impartial, refrain from prejudgment, shall recuse themselves from any case where they may be a party or may have a conflict of interest or may know an officer or a victim or a complainant. I think that a number of the safeguards that are in place and the pledges that we take as members are designed to ensure that we not use material which is apparently publicly available and is not available to us for some strange reason, that we agree not to use that information to prejudge cases or to bias against any particular individual or favor any particular individual. That's part of the selection process for board members. So, it just seems as though we're in a position here of having to triply certify that we're not going to do that in multiple checks. So I think it really puts us as a board at a disadvantage. And I think in many ways it's a slap in the face to the board that we are not to be trusted with this information that as a private citizen, I can freely access for a minimal charge and a minimal inconvenience to myself. But as a board, we're having to wait months and months to do this. And then the additional cost and manpower that it requires to redact this material to what end? I mean, we are supposed to be an impartial, unbiased review board. That's my piece.
So, Member Nixon, you have something?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the concerns, to kind of echo what Eric is saying. If you want us to be unbiased and be neutral on this, then we should be able to look at anything and everything we need to at some point. I understand that it needs to be redacted to go through this board for some reason, but one of the concerns I have is, as an independent board, that there seems to be this dependence on APD in one capacity or another to conduct any analysis at the minimal level. And it just doesn't feel very neutral. It almost feels like, the more of a yes man I am, the better it is as far as what it is we're trying to do. And so when you take away an inalienable right, such as going on to a public place as a private citizen to get any and all OBDR that you can, and then it's limited, it does feel like it's being hamstringed and biased to the favor of APD, which is definitely not where this board wants to be, in my opinion. Just stating my feeling.
Thank you. I'd like to make one comment, and that is that I think it's important to identify the source of this. It isn't just a general source of the city or APD, but it's the collective bargaining agreement, which is the main control over what we're talking about here, and that's done by the APOA. So I think it just has to be recognized where the difference is, or where the constraints arise. And it's not I think there's the desire, and it's been expressed by ordinance, to create an independent board, but there are restrictions which come from other agreements that are already in place with the union. And so I think that just needs to be recognized who it is that's created these constraints on our ability to oversee. And I think this is, if for example, NACOL, this is a common theme that is found at NACOL, where oversight agencies have difficulty doing oversight because of conflicts with union contracts and protections that are built into police unions. And it's a fundamental aspect, challenge associated with doing oversight. So I think it's just important to be clear about where these restrictions come, because that's a major source of them. So I'd like to, I think we have a working plan to go forward and attempt to make some progress in this on this problem. Get the information that we can best within all the constraints. So I'd like to move on, close this item out, and have direct our attorney to make contact with the city attorney, Van Meter, and then we can go forward from there. So if there's no further discussion, we will move on to item H, which is a discussion regarding a stipulated order. I believe we've essentially covered this at other items in the agenda, other points in the agenda, and at this point, I'd just like to point out there is a meeting that for informational purposes, it's going to be on the 17th at 4 o'clock, I believe, and there's a Zoom invitation out, and all the board members are welcome and encouraged to attend that meeting and learn more about the progress of this stipulated order. So, yes, Council Gooch.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Cass. I just want to mention some timing issues with this particular order and when we expect a hearing to be set. I don't know when that's going to happen. I just want to point out that if the board, after having this meeting and informational session discussing the order, wants to take a position, it may need to consider a special meeting so that it can take that position prior to whenever the hearing is set. It may be that the hearing will be set in to coincide with your next regularly scheduled meeting. But if the board is not inclined to make a special meeting to talk about taking a position, I would need to know if the board would like me to attend that hearing or not. It might be a little premature, but I just don't want, I don't want to not do what the board would like, and I don't know how the timing is going to work out given this process. So I just mention it now for consideration.
I think the chair has been given the authority to request that you attend this meeting on behalf of informing the board the progress of this. So if that's unless I hear from the board contrary to that, I would say that you should attend the meeting on our and participate in that information. Is there any more comments, discussion about the about this item in the agenda before we move on? Member Olivas.
So I'm just a little bit concerned here because I think this is a really important issue. In fact, I think it's probably an underappreciated, very big issue. As Director Harness said, this goes back to timelines. I mean, this kind of goes to everything here. And it seems like we sort of lost the forest through the trees here as to what we're going to do. There was this discussion of this MOU and moving forward with that, and it seems that we kind of just blew right past that. And I think that this has gone on a long time, probably preceding any of our terms on this board, and it will continue to go on, but we haven't really taken any concrete step here, in my opinion, to address this or begin to address it. So maybe I'm misunderstanding what the action item is here, but
we're on item H, which is the stipulated order regarding the creation of the EFIT the external force investigation team, the changes at APD regarding their this, what the court is going to require. It's new. It's it's what the cities and the DOJ have been negotiating to bring before the court. So I mean, it's a new issue in that they're bringing the major change will be having an external force investigation team, and at this point, I'm not sure that we have any more information as to how that's going to affect us, other than to attend the briefing where we get a chance to learn more and have some input. If it turns out that in order for us to have a voice in the court, we have to have a special meeting in order to consider what our action would be, then that is where the timeline, I think, comes in. So we're at the mercy of how quickly the DOJ and the city can inform us as to what their plan is for the stipulated order, and then when the court is going to schedule to hear it. So I mean, I think that's if someone can add more perspective to that, I'd appreciate it. Yes, Councilor Gooch.
Chair Dr. Cass, Honorable Board, my understanding is that there will likely be a status conference set on this issue with the court late February, early March. But again, the court hasn't set it yet, but that's my understanding. And so the timing will be the meeting, the informational meeting on the 17th should be an opportunity for the board to have any questions answered, decide if this is something that it wants to take a position on or not. But as Chair Dr. Cass has pointed out, if the board wants to take a position or submit a letter or whatever the process may be, if there's even an opportunity, I just raised the timing issue so that it's on everyone's radar, if anything. And if the hearing is set, I assume the board would like me to attend that hearing, since we will not have a meeting per se prior to that hearing.
Does that answer your question, Member Olivas?
Yes, I think so.
All right. So is there any more discussion on this item? If it's not clear, I as the chair, I think I have the authority to ask Councilor Gooch to attend the meeting for the purpose of representing the board's interests at that meeting. And I just want to make sure, that there was no strenuous objection to that. I believe it's within the authority of the chair and the intent of the board. So I'm directing her to attend the meeting. So that's so given that, I think this item is done, and we can move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the meeting with council in closed session. So if at this point, I would ask for a motion to go into closed session where personnel issue or limited for the purpose of limited personnel matter discussion pursuant to NMSA 1978 section 10.15.1H2, the executive director evaluation. So do I have a motion?
I'd make a motion to enter closed session to discuss the executive director's evaluation.
Second.
All right. Member Romeo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we're moving to closed session. Okay, this is the Civilian Police Oversight Agency Board returning from closed session at which only limited personnel matters pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1H2 were discussed regarding Executive Director evaluation. So I'd like a roll call vote to return to open session. Member Armio Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
Yes.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Levis.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we're back in open session. We're at item 13 on the agenda, other business. And other business, there are two items. One is that next month is the board elections at the March meeting, and also we're at the point at which the board votes on the PPRB representative. So I think Member or Councilor Gooch, did you have anything you wanted to add to this, given that this is you're the one who keeps us legal on these issues?
No, I just know that we have a fair amount of stuff to do in the March meeting. I believe the OMA resolution will also be before the board. So I just mention it so that you all know about it. But no, otherwise March is just a busy time for you all to redo all your votes.
Is there any other business? Member Galloway.
I have a couple of things that I want to circle back to that came up in this meeting. The first is a conversation about whether or not it would be appropriate to update our policies and procedures to explicitly exclude cases from being automatically administratively closed if an employee is no longer working at APD. And so I'd like to have a discussion about that. And if it's easier just to put it on the agenda for next month to have the discussion, because I know it's late, that's fine as well.
Can't we just refer that to the Policy and Procedures Committee to consider and make a recommendation?
Sure, it's fine by me.
Then I would make that motion. If I can make a motion on this, is this an action item?
No, we can't because it's other business.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would like that to be a conversation that we talk about. And it can start with PMP. That's fine if you guys want to take that up. Tina and Tara are both kind of raising hands here.
Member Armia Pruitt.
Just real quickly, so if it's moved into the Policy and Procedures Committee, then Chantal, how do you feel about that in terms of, you know, a broader discussion? I guess that would come later, but if for whatever reason Policy and Procedure comes back and says, these are the reasons we don't think it's a good idea, then have we sort of undercut this process where you're trying to get a discussion started with everybody?
I mean, it's not my favorite thing to be excluded from an issue that I'm bringing up, but if that's what the board wants to do, it's not a hill I'm going to die on either. You know what I mean? Like, there are processes in place. And so,
yeah. Yeah, we unfortunately are such a small board at this point. We can't like invite you to come, and present on it to the committee.
Right.
Councilor Gooch, do you have? I thought I saw your hand a minute ago.
Chair Dr. Cass, Honorable Board, this, even though it's not an action item, the chair does have the authority to refer items to subcommittees. You could consider doing that without need to have an action item on your agenda.
We can refer to the policy committee, who's going to meet before the board meets again. So it won't impede the process. So we can still put it on the agenda for the next board meeting.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
The other thing that I wanted to ask about is whether or not training could be set up with whichever department in APD is responsible for the K-9 unit, because I know that Chair Cass had some points that he made last month at our board meeting about the use of K-9s, and then also just because we had so many use of force cases to this month that involved the K-9 unit, I think that it might be responsible of us to spend a little more time with that unit instead of trying to determine things that we don't really know anything about.
And I can answer that. We also thought that was the case for policy and procedure, and we actually put it on the agenda or it was supposed to be on the agenda, but it fell through the cracks for our last policy and procedure meeting, where we were going to invite somebody from the K-9 unit to give us more information about the unit. Instead, like I say, we missed it, or I missed it, and we're going to put it on the next agenda. So I will invite somebody from the K-9 unit to come to the policy meeting. We can also invite the same person to come to the board meeting.
I would actually prefer a more intensive training, and kind of what I'm wondering, and maybe this is for Director Harness, is if the monitoring team might be amenable to allowing us to spend some time with the K-9 unit in lieu of a ride-along. Given COVID, it would be a much smaller unit, much less access to the public, if they would allow that to be considered as part of a ride-along, or in place of a ride-along.
And that's an issue we've tried to get through before, is to expand the definition of ride-alongs. I mean, right. I'm not sure we wouldn't have to necessarily get ride-along credit in order to do something like that. So, I mean, if we wanted to do that, I think that's something that's possible to do, but it's going to take, it won't happen in a month. It'll take, some period of time to get it, to arrange that. But I think we can do some groundwork in the meantime to get information about the K-9 unit and then see where that leads us.
I would just like more intensive time with them, and not just a presentation at a board meeting. Really spending the time and seeing what they know, I think is going to be more advantageous. And
it's not an either-or. It's not an either-or situation.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. Well, no, I'm just saying it isn't. We can do both. I'm trying to be agreeable here.
I'm done.
Okay. Anything else? Any other business? Yes, Member Olivas.
So I have one question for our council present here. This is separate from my other issue that we discussed earlier tonight. I'm curious about the provision in our policies and procedures regarding special meetings. And I've noticed this dichotomy here. The special meeting can be called by the chairperson or a majority of members upon 3 days' notice, or on petition of 1,000 or more civilians of Albuquerque. And so my question here kind of goes with the logistics of this member called special meeting. How does that work if this vote is not on an agenda, or if it's done outside of a meeting?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, you're trying me at a late hour, but there are procedures under the OMA that allow the board to take action and then retroactively announce that action that have been taken in compliance with the OMA, as long as a report is made to the Attorney General within a certain period of time, telling the Attorney General why the board did what it did. So it does look a bit like a chicken and an egg when read, but there are provisions that in an emergency, or when the majority of the board needs to take those actions, can do so.
Yes.
I'm just curious, Tina. So the like a special meeting versus an emergency meeting, right? So like an emergency meeting is the one you would have to report to the AG, and there are like stipulations around that, where like significant financial impact, or like there's a list of requirements that have to be met for an emergency meeting to be called within like a 24-hour period, if I recall. But a special meeting has a different set of circumstances, right, or requirements.
Chair Dr. Cass, Board Member Armila Pruitt, yes, you are correct. It is. A special meeting is simply not a regularly scheduled meeting, and it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of an emergency. In my time with the board, there has never been an incident in which the chair would not call a special meeting, so we have never gotten to the majority members on 3 days notice special meeting. It has always traditionally been the chair.
But in other words, you're saying that that provision is somehow available. I still don't fully understand how that works, but from a legal perspective, without developing issues of rolling quorum or non-notice votes.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas. So in my mind, what it would happen is the board would say, we need a meeting. Director Harness, on behalf of the board, would see when it was available to do. You would have to give the 72 hours notice required by the OMA to have a meeting in which you would vote to call a special meeting, and you would have to give 3 days notice for that special meeting. So that puts you out about a week from deciding you want to do it. Now, the only way you can actually get to the calling of that meeting is arguably by each of you saying to the director or your chair, we would like this meeting, we need to get this scheduled. That necessarily doesn't create a rolling quorum as long as the discussion is only going to Director Harness or myself or the chair. I hope that we are not in a position where we are having to take those steps, but if there are, I'm happy to answer those questions of any board member that would like to do that. But generally, Director Harness is the person that helps facilitate all of your meetings with his help from his staff.
Understood. Thank you, Counselor. The second item I had on other business, sorry, it's getting late here. I'm drawing a blank on this. Well, I'll move on to the third item I wanted to discuss here, which basically deals with our member conduct and ethics policy that we spent a good deal of time on, many members of this board did, dealing with how we are to behave as individuals as part of a larger group. And I've recently come to some findings where I believe there may be particular member who has not honored that agreement to behave as a member of a board in their individual capacity. We all sort of lose some of our individual persons as part of this board and agree to represent the decisions and the findings of the board and come to the board to request permission or to request action or request a finding of the board. And so I think it's important that as individual members, we focus on prioritizing the will of the board and defending the will of the board, even if we may not always agree with it, or if we may not always think the board will support the actions which we believe are justified or right. So with that being said, I think that the second point that I realized I forgot goes into member reviews and reviews of member conduct. And I think it's particularly important given that our time under the current chair is running out. We've got one more meeting here in March with the current chair, that we complete the member review processes expeditiously, because part of that process also includes a report by the chair to the board on the overall performance of the board through the performance of its individual members. And so I think that we largely touched on this issue earlier. It sounds like members Pruitt and Armijo Pruitt and Galloway will be having their reviews done sometime this next week. And it sounds like myself and Dr. Cass will be the final shoes to drop. So I hope that we can move swiftly to have those reviews so that all of these potential issues can be brought to light. But I think at this time, what I want to say is that I think that members need to be extremely cautious with who they are representing when they're in situations where they may in fact be representing the board and have not requested the will of the board on a particular situation or question or outcome.
Is anything else? Is there any other business? It was pointed out to me that I may not have mentioned that one of the other items on next month's agenda is the election or election of the PPRB representative from the board to the, and that's just for your information. So, is there any other business before we adjourn? Okay, so seeing no further business, our next meeting is scheduled for March 11th at 5 o'clock, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, Member Armio Pruitt?
Yes.
Member Galloway?
Yes.
Member Mitchell?
Yes.
Member Nixon?
Yes.
Member Olivas?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, we are adjourned. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.